seems to be one of those mornings where the technical gremlins have showed up once again.
We're in Mercury retrograde.
Are we Mercury?
Yes.
I was just thinking that as I was sitting there. I thought, I wonder what Mercury's doing. Okay, well that explains it, doesn't it? Well, our speaker this morning is a very dear member of our community. It is Alara Payten, and she is an evolutionary medicine woman. She has been part of the Unity community for many years. She served on the board, she served on the spiritual leadership team. She is currently still the prayer chaplain trainer. Her calling, her personal calling of what is hers to do in the world really surrounds ceremony and bringing sacred space to community. So please help me welcome Alara Payten to tell us about what is mine to do.
Well, those of you who haven't been here for a while, when Susan said I was part of the spiritual leadership team, I did resign from the spiritual leadership team because I came to recognize that it was no longer mine to do. And our theme this month is creating community. And as I was pondering what I was going to speak about, I realized that as with all speakers, we are living our talk as we come up to our talk. And I went through a process of determining what is mine to do now. First of all, I'm just going to talk a little bit about bringing about spiritual community, what are some of those factors. And I'm going to talk about how I was able to determine what was no longer mine to do and open up to what is mine to do now. So, creating community. Here we are creating a spiritual community. So many of you have very many communities that you are creating. And you might notice, if you've been part of a spiritual community before, people who come to be part of creating spiritual community have some common core values that brings them here even once. And so what are some of the values that are core to you being here today? Just call them out.
Community.
Respect.
One spirit.
One spirit.
Heart-centered.
Heart-centered.
Love.
Love.
Acceptance.
Acceptance. Welcoming. Healing. Forgiveness. Growth. And here we are, each one of us going on our own journeys of all that. I mean, is there anything, if you are on a spiritual path, every one of those words probably applies to your life. But here you are in a group of people where you have gathered because you have a desire to be a part of spiritual awakening in community. And we talked about that in our mission or vision, being part of the spiritual awakening, and to be part of a community that is transforming lives and opening to more and more knowing, like embodied knowing of our divine essence. And so we've got our 5 principles over there. We've got 5 basic unity principles. Those are the, you might say, container of the unity movement. Unity isn't built on doctrine, it's built on it's a prayer and education movement that was founded on these 5 principles. And so people who come here more than once are comfortable with the message that is founded on those principles and that follows the mission and the vision and our statement of being, we are here as love. And of course, there are many ways of engaging in community. So we have people who are on the spiritual leadership team and the board of directors. We have people who are leaders of teams who spend more time, more effort, more of their life force energy in contributing to the weaving, the increased weaving. And it's not a static container here, is it? Anyone who's been in any community, it expands and then there's a bit of a contraction and then it'll expand again. And so how people come into the doing to allow us to be in this space. So during the week, there is a before and after school program here. We used to have this space 7 days a week. Now we are here on Sunday, and we have Toastmasters on Tuesday. And the rest of the time, a preschool is here. So we have those who are called to be of sacred service to this community to come and create this container, put the chairs up, put the lights up, and we've got the music team that comes early. Some people are part of the welcoming committee, welcoming team. They greet you at the door. They're part of the hospitality. You can see that, they had to set the chairs up today. And so how people show up in their doing is variable, even for them. We're not always showing up in the same way each and every week. And here we talk about sacred service. You won't, not very often will you hear the word volunteer. I can't say that I haven't heard that word. I'm sure I've used that word myself. We look at sacred service here. And sacred service is, what's your calling? It could be to assist with dishes. There are what you might consider mundane tasks that need to be looked after. The men's team is, Men of Unity are looking after putting up the chairs. That's a rather mundane thing, and when you do it from, this is my experience anyway, when I do the mundane from the foundation of sacred service, of allowing my beingness and my heartfulness to let me go forth into my doing. Do you notice when it's coming from the heart and when it feels right and when it feels mine to do? You can do things that might feel a little bit sluggish, to someone else, and yet there you are, in there, in the doing and the joy of the doing. And for those of you that have been part of this community for any way, shape, or form, notice how you get to chat and how you get to interact with the other people that are in sacred service. So you might notice that as you have come into greater sacred service in different ways, that you might feel a bit more of the community, a bit more of the fabric of the community. And there's a time for pretty much everyone to come and be served. There have been times of my life where I've needed to come and be served by the container. And for some people, that is a much longer period of requirement for where they are on their own evolutionary journey. And so when you take classes on church and spiritual communities, they talk about how there's a certain percentage of people who come to be served, and then there are those who feel called to be the service container. And here in Unity of Calgary, we are a spiritual community that does not have a minister. We have a spiritual leadership team. We have various speakers. We have community speakers and special guest speakers that are outside of our community. And so it's community leading and co-creating with community. So there's lots of opportunity here to be in sacred service, but then also to recognize when we need to be in a space of being served. And part of this sacred service is cultivating practices of self-awareness so that we can tap into how we are serving. And if it is still nurturing us, is it still our calling? And not from a place of something's wrong, something's bad, because something no longer fits, but checking in to see if what we said yes to wholeheartedly at one time is still where we are in our wholeheartedness. So we recognize here we are evolving. Oh, wow, if you've been around, anyone's been on a spiritual journey for the last few years, we've been rocking and rolling a lot the last few years, yeah, personally. And here we, at the leadership, you get a container, you kind of feel like the container's kind of settled in, and then, whoop, something happens, and there's a shift and all of a sudden there's a need for recalibration. And this is a normal part of any organization, this expansion and contraction. And sometimes, as we went through in about 2010 through 2012, there was almost a complete involution for the next evolution of unity. And so it's normal for things to expand and contract, and coming into understanding that and allowing that individually and on committees and with leadership, we have found to be really important here. So part of the way of doing self-awareness when you are co-creating a community that you have decided that you want to be more involved in some way, so you've stepped forward into sacred service, is to be aware of what Marianne Morrissey talks about in her prosperity class about our longings and our discontents. You know, if you're doing your sacred service and you notice that something just doesn't feel quite right, it's a bit glitchy, in a way it wasn't glitchy before, and you can, wow, there's a little, no, it's not quite as flowing, not quite feeling as aligned, as much me. So being aware of when something is in discontent, and then noticing if something isn't quite how you want it, you kind of have this longing, oh, I'd like it to be more of this. So when you notice that longing, what you want more of, those are all clues to how your evolved human psyche, woven in with your divine essence, is calling you to be aware of what is next for you. What kind of shift are you calling for? How's your satisfaction factor? You know, that deep in your bones satisfaction. When you've finished your sacred service and you think about coming into the next opportunity for sacred service, do you have that sense of fulfillment and satisfaction? Notice if there are irritations. If you go, wow, I feel really cranky after I've been doing that. So our irritations, what pokes at us, can be an opportunity to notice, like, oh, I've got some shadow aspects going on. I've got things poking at me. This isn't about my sacred service. My sacred service and the team I'm on, where I'm feeling poked, is about my, maybe my inner child, an old pattern of behavior that was kind of dormant, and now it's calling me to transform it, so I get poked by people around me, so I can say, hello irritations. Hi, what have you got for me? Why are you showing up in this way? And so these check-ins, which are all about authentic vulnerability. Is anyone familiar with Brené Brown's work in vulnerability? And so I must first be authentically vulnerable with myself. I can't be authentically vulnerable with anybody else if I'm not vulnerable first with the person in the mirror, the person inside my skin. And so having practices where we can sit with ourselves and ponder and be curious and access divine guidance. So that was all about that insight in the daily word today, right? Finding that guidance that is right and perfect for us, honoring that we have this human mind, this human intellect that loves to solve problems, loves to bring structure and form to an idea. And allowing the mind, the human mind, to not just be accessed through the brain, but to access through the great mind, the universal mind, and allow the mind to be in service of the heart. So all of the research through HeartMath Institute, some of you are familiar with that, they've been doing a lot of scientific research on how the heart center works with the mind. And they have found that the heart center generates a field that's 5,000 times greater than the mind. And so we've come to understand through their ongoing research in coherence, when we can bring our heart energy, our heart essence into resonance, into coherence, then the coherence in a group goes up. And they've been doing this in the corporate world, in the medical field. I used to work as a physical therapist at Foothills Hospital, and I was absolutely delighted when I went to Foothills a couple of years ago, and they had a poster in the elevator that talked about HeartMath and coming into the heart, and it said HeartMath Institute. And I can tell you, when I was there in the 80s, they never would have had that in an elevator. That is so freakishly cool that our Alberta Health Services realizes the value of coming into the heart. They are about, this is my experience, about the bottom line. They have to make that a not-for-profit, it has to work. They can't just continue to go into hole. We all understand that. But it's evident to me that when they put heart math and talking about how you've got to come into resonance with yourself and your family and your friends, then they've recognized you've got to encompass the whole being. So this is a great stride forward. And this is what this community is about, allowing the body, the mind, and the spirit. And if you've been here for any length of time, you know we're about meditation. We're about prayer. Meditation with Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founders of Unity. The meditation aspect is really about going into the silence and allowing the thoughts of the human mind to come into greater stillness, or if the thought comes, to not be attached to it. And many of you have meditation practices, I'm sensing in this group, where you mindfulness, you let the thoughts come and you let them go. You don't judge the thought comes, you don't try, oh, I'm not supposed to have any thoughts, because then that's a thought that you're not supposed to have any thoughts, right? And you just let it go like a balloon. Oh, hello thought, thanks for sharing, and you let go of the helium balloon and off it goes, right? And then there's prayer. So Susan did an affirmative prayer for us today, where we use the power of the voice, the word. We are the masters and mistresses of our own lives. And so the spoken word, just like in the scriptures, first is the word, and the word said, let there be. And so our affirmations are saying, let there be. And through affirmations, we are saying what we are commanding for our life and our body and our mind and our spirit. And so, leading up to a question where you ask, what is mine to do? As you notice your discontents and you notice your longings, I noticed in spiritual leadership that I couldn't be present to what is required when you've said yes to a leadership position, sacred service. You need to be able to step into it and be okay with the doingness of it. You know how it is when you're in leadership, you're leaders of your own families, you're leaders of your own life. If you have to step forward and say, okay, well, these actions, well, they require doing, right? There's a certain amount of doing that happens in the world to get things done. So I noticed some glitches. I noticed that, like, this isn't quite fitting anymore. And I noticed that I was noticing some discontents, and of not being able to step forward to be present to the ongoing conversations and dialogues and the agreed commitments in bringing fruition. And so I was part of a women's event at the end of January called She Power, Beauty and the Beast. And it was about finding our own voice and doing body work to free up any places in us that prevent us from knowing our own truth, to be authentically vulnerable with ourselves. And I was drumming there. I was part of the facilitation of that women's event, but I was also a participant. And as I explored my own voice and allowed myself to be honest and true with myself, I realized, wow, I gotta find out what's mine to do here. Now, it's interesting, when I mentioned, contacted the other spiritual leadership team, they had no idea that I was having all this discontent, so I guess I was kind of covering my butt pretty good. But I recognized I really needed to know what's mine to do. And so what I chose to do is a process by Reverend Eliza Bloom, who has spoken here a few times, that she developed. This is from 2002. What is mine to do? A guided process for spiritual discernment. Now, this is copyrighted material, so I didn't make slides of it. I checked it out on Amazon.ca. You can get this for under $4 Canadian, and you now get an electronic instead of a CD download. It's under $7, $6.83 or something like that. So if this resonates with you at all, I highly recommend accessing this kind of a process. And it's about going into that stillness and asking questions. Our egoic structure and our consciousness and subconsciousness and superconsciousness are, they love questions, apparently. Our subconscious loves questions, and many people have, in the spiritual world, have said how we bring about what we want is not up to our smaller mind to try and figure out. It's for our divine mind, divine order, divine will to figure out. And that's what this spiritual discernment process is. That you start with a question of what is mine to do, not how, why, where, or when. And you write that down for yourself. Now, if you're doing the audio, she goes through this and there's lovely music, and that's what I did. I would put it on pause and I would fill in these questions. And what is important? What guiding principles, values, and beliefs do you choose to have present as you step into any life situation? We don't usually do this process when we're feeling totally aligned. There's not usually a reason to go into this kind of a discernment process when everything feels aligned. But that is when we do affirmative prayer for celebration. That's when you still do your meditative practices to still be present. So it's not about not doing practices, right? And then there's a question, what's in the way? What are you willing to release in order to more fully express as Creator, God, Universal Spirit, whatever word you want to use, is calling you now? Specify thoughts, fears, assumptions, expectations, or agendas. And I noticed I was in should. Oh, I should keep doing it because I love this, I love the people, and I said I would, and I was in a lot of shoulds. What's the truth? Proclaim your divine potential, your divine attributes with the words I am.